What surface ECGs need to be available? Obviously, we need to always have 12 available, because remember how I told you how important 12 leads are, okay? However, the physicians like to see 3 or 4 specific leads when they're looking at their endocardiac. So we want to know what the physician wants. They're usually based on vectors. So if I have lead 1, I'm going to have lead 3, lead 2, or AVF. See what I mean? So they're almost at 90 degrees to each other. If I have 2 V leads, it's probably going to be V1 and V6 because they're at 90 degrees to each other this way. Make sense? What EP catheters need to be available? I'm building a study configuration. I'm going to use catheters. What am I using? We're not talking about brands. We're talking about this is going to be my atrial catheter. This is going to be my His catheter. This is my RV. This is my CS. This is my duodecahalo that I'm using for my flutter cases. It's going to loop in the atrium. You see what I mean? And then when we label these, because like I said, I'm not going to put down that, well, I'm not putting down I'm using a Josephson versus a Coronado or a Coronado. All right? I'm just going to say, this is my high-rate atrial catheter. My high-rate atrial catheter is going to have how many electrodes? How many electrodes on each one of these? 4. Okay, are you doing parahysteia pacing? Are you? Because you're going to need 10 on that hip. I know, I'm picking on him. My point being is don't assume. Make sure you know. Okay? And then, what are my pacing requirements? Which one of these catheters are going to pace? Because if I know which ones are going to pace, I'm probably going to want to separate them based on that hardware thing I was telling you about. If I know I'm going to be doing atrial pacing and ventricular pacing and CS pacing and ablation pacing, maybe I want to make sure each one of those catheters are on its own separate hardwired channel. And I really wish I would have known that when I first started, because I really screwed up some study configuration. Which means I did a lot of clicking. Okay? Next question, do I really need all these catheters? All right? Do I really need to do I need to put, like, everything that's going to do my regular EP study, my atrial flutter with its duodeca, then I got my lassos, and then we're going to try and do a basket catheter. Do I all need it on one thing with it open? Because every time you create a catheter channel, you open up a way for noise to get into the system. Because once I say, look for here, it opens it up into the electrical system. But if I'm not going to use it, so like when I built stuff, I had a study configuration that basically covered all my right-sided cases. Then I had a study configuration that covered my left-sided cases. Then I had a study configuration specifically for AFib because they had that silly lasso that they were throwing all over the place. So I now have 4 study configurations that cover basically everything. And I would turn things on and off for each separate one so I didn't have extra avenues for noise to get leaked into my system. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And here's one of the best ones, because I believe in excellence due to laziness. I want to do a great job so I don't have to do it ever again. All right? So do I have a really cool, awesome study configuration that I've already built that's close? Maybe I can just like copy that one and then change the few items I need. You see what I mean? I will work for 3 hours to come up with a shortcut so that I know that for every day after that point, I can do something that will take only 4.5 seconds instead of 10 minutes so I can go home sooner.
Hey Art, when you make study configurations, do you ever have to personalize them for the physicians?
Depends upon how big of a jerk you are.
You know, we had to change colors.
Yes. So there's a certain amount of that goes on in the industry. I would not allow that to occur in my lab when I was running. Okay? I said, get together, pick. Because there's no reason for us to have 4 of the same things that only have a color change.
It's because you went to Michigan and you have to have...
Yes.
Right.
And there's a reason why, and there's now actually a valid, I actually found out there's a valid reason, because the way most of these systems work because you have upgrades, you have different systems, and then you also have different amplifiers. So when you start a study, what happens is the computer says, I'm going to start a study. What amplifier do I have? Oh, I have a 126 awesome amplifier. All right, channel awesome amplifier, that's great. So now I have all these study configurations. So I have to figure out how every single study configuration needs to be programmed for that amplifier. If you have 5 study configurations, your case opens quickly. If you have 40, it can take a minute and a half to open while it processes all that data. And it does it every time you open the case. Because what happens if you open the case, but your field engineer came in because you had a bad amplifier and replaced it with something he had in his trunk really fast? And it's only 64 channels instead of 128. So that means it has to program it for that one. So every time you open a case, it recreates the program and list to how to run that particular amplifier. And it doesn't do it for the study configuration, it does it for all the study configurations. Because you might switch halfway through the case. And it's got to be ready to go. So we've had systems that literally would take 2 minutes to fire up because they had 50 study configurations because each physician had 10.
Less is more.
Yes, less is very much more. And then when the systems were crashing because of all this and they couldn't get things done, they were asking what the problem was, and we pointed at it and laughed and said, let's fix this for you. All right? So once you have all that, then you can start planning where you're going to plug all these different catheters in. Okay? So you know what catheters they are, you know how many electrodes they have, you know whether they're going to pace or not, so they need their own individual pacing channel. If you know that a catheter is not going to be pacing, you can plug it in wherever you want. Because it's not pacing, you can just plug it in where it'll fit. Like the high right atrial channel. We plug that in on block A 1 through 4. Normally we don't pace in the His, even though I just picked on you about that. So it usually gets plugged in the same atrial channel. You see what I mean? Because it really doesn't matter where
5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And that way it sort of makes sense because it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, which is up on top, and in the middle is 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then we go to our ventricle, which is 17, 18, 19, 20, because it jumped over to another pacing channel. See what I mean? Are there other requirements that need to be addressed due to other equipment? St. Jude's, ESI, and Biosense Webster's CARTO, because of the way they do things and how their different cabling is set up, you may not be able to program it the way you want in the most efficient way because they're requiring you to program it a certain way so it actually goes through their system the way it's supposed to. Okay?
They're all starting to talk to each other now. Play nice.
No, we're not.
Okay. Never mind.
Make a plan, write it down. You'll make less mistakes. That's the benefit of me spending a year building study configurations and like a month getting yelled at because it wasn't working. Okay? So our surface leads when we build them, they're pretty straightforward. We have 2 tabs. When we bring up our study configurations, we have this is all the different blocks and different things. And then we have 2 tabs, and the first one that pops up is your display settings. And the reason that pops up is that's usually the one you're going to want to use while you're doing this. Because that's where you're going to turn it off, turn it back on, maybe change its name, maybe change its color. Okay? It's this one that's important when we're starting because these are our hardware settings. So we have our leads 1 through 12. And you notice how our gain settings are all set at 1,000. Now our high pass is set at 0.05. Why is that? Because the P wave and the T wave are very slow coming. And we need to be able to pick that up. Right? But occasionally when it's set at 0.05, we're going to get some of that respiratory variance and it's going to be wandering all over the place. So you can actually up this high pass filter to like 0.5 or 5 hertz, and that will help fix it to its baseline because that's what that does, is it kind of fixes it to its baseline. However, if you do that, what's going to happen to your P waves and T waves? It's going to flatten them out and make them almost impossible to see. Remember, this is intelligent use of our brilliance. we're all EP people here. That means we're brilliant, we rock, and nobody can touch us. All right? So we're going to intelligently use this. So that means if I got one signal tracing that's really, really annoying me, I might change that. But that also means that if I'm doing a neutral attack, and when she talks about mapping, I may not be wanting to use that surface lead to try and mark early onset, because I'm not going to be able to see it because I flattened out my P wave. See what I mean?
What's the low pass?
The low pass is your smudge filter. It's set to 100 hertz.
That was an RCES question.
Yep.
What are the filters set for a surface ECG?
0.05 and 100 are the defaults. Okay? And GE will tell you never change these. If you give me something I can play with, I'm going to play with it. It's the 4-year-old in me. All right? I've got to flick it. All right? So, but the other problem is our only setting under this is 40 hertz. And that will actually start flattening out our T waves. Not our T waves, but our QRSs. So we don't ever change our low pass on it. Now the notch filter will fuse because we're out on the body, we're in the air, we're getting all kinds of crud. So we use the notch filter as a default. Now one of the tricks that I use to see how clean my lab is on link 1, 2, and 3 because they're the most stable of them, and you might as well at least give it half a chance. I'll turn the notch filter on and see how much noise is in the room. And 90% of the labs, the moment I turn that on, their signals go like this. Yeah! Because they're just not built very well.
You say you turn it on?
I turn it off.
Okay.
I turn the notch filter off so I can see how ugly the room is.
Okay, gotcha.
You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Only in the EP lab can you turn a notch filter off for a surface ECG. It's defaulted on every single piece of ECG equipment out there. We're the only ones that allow you to do that. Because if they gave it to me, I'd have to switch it on. Okay? Our last thing here is this just turns it on. We want these all to be active. Okay? We make it inactive, it just goes away when we record it, and we don't have that lead anymore. Which is something we never ever want to do on a 12-lead doing EP lab. Our intracardiac settings are a little different. We have the opportunity to change the label, set the type, see how it says bipole, and these are the inputs, and they're placed on each of those blocks. There's 32 pinpoints to plug into those blocks, and we just plug them in. You can plug them in any way you want, but remember, you've got to make it make sense so whoever's troubleshooting behind you can figure it out. So one of the things that we always do is low number to low number. I'm plugging in my RV. We already said that we're plugging the RV in at 17, 18, 19, and 20. So 17 is the lowest number. Distal number 1 electrode is the lowest number. They go together. 18, 2, 19, 3, 20, 4. Go low number to low number. Okay? It really doesn't matter to the computer if you switch it around, but then it becomes very difficult for you to figure out what's going on when you're trying to troubleshoot. All right? Our gain settings, remember what I said, it's 1,000 for everything except for your hiss and your ablation. We go ahead and set those at 2,500 because those are places we're specifically looking for little itty-bitty tiny signals. Itty-bitty tiny signals. Smile. Talking to you. That's better. All right? So our settings for this, by default, is 30 for high pass, and that's because it's a bipole antenna that's very short. Because basically anything 30 or less is going to get washed out because of our small little antenna. So we just set it, that antenna really starts kicking in at about 20, 25 hertz. It's filtering out a lot underneath that. So that's why we set it as a default at 30. And that makes it really nice because that fixes that intercardiac signal right at isoelectric lines so it's not wavering all over the place. If you're ever looking at a signal and it's going like this, all over the screen, somebody didn't set their high pass correctly. They've got it at like 0.05 or 8.5. So we want that at 30. Now our low pass, it traditionally has always been set at 500.
That's RCES too. These numbers right that you have up here.
So And now that we know what the defaults are, I'm going to give you a little thing here, because our notch pass would be off because we don't want to get rid of those little tiny signals we were talking about, right? Earlier? But if you're dealing with a noisy situation and they want you to start trying to fix it, one of the things that you can do is you can change your notch pass filter. Remember how I said most of your signals are running between like 10 hertz, 5 hertz, all the way to about 60 or 80 hertz? So is that anywhere close to 500? We have a setting on our system for 150. All electronic interference is usually based off of a harmonic from your 60 hertz cycle. You guys understand what a harmonic is? All you do is just double the number, and that's the next one. So musical reference. So it's all a harmonic. So a lot of times, a lot of our noise is coming in at 120 hertz, 180 hertz, 240 hertz. 240 hertz is a big number for computers. Okay? The X-ray systems, because they run at three-phase power, are 180 hertz. You can get some noise off of them if they're not shielded correctly. So if I take this from 500 to 150, what do you think that does to like my X-ray noise interference and my computer interference?
Goodbye.
Goodbye. I always take this from 500 to 150 before I turn on my notch filter. I have some sites that don't use anything but 150 now for everything. My only concern, and I've been trying to work with getting some of our research people in a couple of our research centers that do work with our equipment to do some interesting things, because I'd like to get a bank and record what the actual frequency, what the speed is of like various types of tissue and whether they're healthy or not, so we have an idea and can filter, really design filters that work really, really well. Pulmonary vein potentials. I know they're fast, just don't know how fast. So this might interfere with that. And the reason I say it might is because I have no data to say otherwise.
So if you were doing AFib, you would put it back.
With a lasso, it might be at 500. Though I have some very prominent AF centers that use only 150 for everything. And they say they have no problems. But I said this is science, and I believe it, and I believe in clinical-based, evidence-based medicine. I have no evidence. This is just an opinion. We haven't had a chance to publish, peer review, or anything like that. So use it at your own risk. Something I bring up, some of the doctors say, let's try it. They like it. Some of the doctors say, well, there's no evidence out there. I can't use it. And I'm like, that's fine. That's a valid answer. Okay? Once you get done with all that, and we can go through all this really quickly. Really get rid of that. This is where we change our scale. And you remember how I said it's global for our live screen? Remember our piece in hardware. This is a standard block layout in the industry for our system. Block A, 1 through 4, is 5 through 8, RV 17 through 20. Block B is CS 1 through 10, since one patient came in with 16, and then RF is 1 through 20 on the final one.
Is it possible, or do they ever do this? I know it's 1 to 2, but do you ever see 2, 3, or you know?
Yeah, we will do that. After working really, really hard, that's a standard configuration when you're doing your HIFs. You connect 1 and 2, and then you connect 2 and 3, and then you connect 3 and 4, so you actually get signals all the way across the entire spread of the catheter instead of doing 2 and 2.
So that's most commonly seen at the HIS.
That's commonly seen at the HIS. It's also commonly seen on lasso catheters for pulmonary vein isolation. There's only one thing I need to point out about that, and I found this out working with engineers and big brainiac people with big glasses, pocket protectors, but they're really cool and they get hits. These people inform me, and it's made sense. I've seen this. I've seen like noise on your HIS, and by turning off that 2-3 connection, it makes it go away. Why? I'm electrically connecting all 4 electrodes together and creating an antenna that's this big instead of one that's this big.
Right.
Seen that happen with the lasso catheters as well, because we're connecting like 10 electrodes in a circle all together, and then once we took those little interconnections, so they're each of their own separate electrode pair all by themselves, noise went away.
So lots of noise then if you can.
Lots of noise. All right? Makes it nice and convenient, but that goes back to poor catheter position laziness. All right? Some things when you're creating your displays, your surface leads are always on the top, and then you can set up your catheters according to physiologic position from superior to inferior. So if I'm thinking about that, my high rate atrial catheter is probably going to be on top. My RV is going to be on the bottom. Right? We always set up, except for one group out of New York, and I run into their doctors every once in a while. The electrodes, the distal is on the bottom. So when you're looking at it, it should go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But there is like 1 or 2 schools out there that have the doctors that like to flip those. And it's really annoying when I go to those places because I can never figure out what's going on. I'll say something, they'll be like, haha, no, it's really this. Because I'm looking at everything upside down. Like I said, these rules are not set in stone. I used to have a statement back from my paramedic, EP, CAT, concert, ER days. No plan ever survives first contact with the enemy, the patient, the doctor, the band, the venue. Everything will change based on whatever. So there are many times I go in, they want me to help them build a study configuration. I'm like, where's the doctor? Because I know he's going to have his own rules. Oh, he says he'll be here 15 minutes before the case starts tomorrow. All right, so we're just going to build it the way traditionally it's supposed to be built. And then when he comes in, he spends 30 minutes complaining because it's not the way he likes it and he can't figure out what's going on. So you get to create your own pages. In our system, we have 8 pages, and all you have to do is bounce down. Top of the page the top page is usually your 12 lead, and then you have various pages underneath based on whatever catheters you have in the body and what you're doing. All right? I usually try and have people set them up based on the workflow. So I'll have like a 3 lead, a 3 catheter, and then underneath it I'll just have the ablation added to it. So whenever you need your ablation, you just pop down one page and it's ready to go. Do the same thing with a 4 catheter. I'll have high rate atrium, HIS, RV, CS, and then when he throws the ablation catheter in, it just flips down in areas and everybody's ready to rock without any problems. Yeah. Is everybody clipped? This is something that you can do. Sometimes, like, we're looking for a little tiny signal on our HIS, but we have a really big A and a really big V, and it's covering up everything else. So when we're looking, I know there was markers. There we go. It's really quick. So you've got your standard HIS tracing, right? And these tops and bottoms are covering up my other signals, okay? So I can clip them. Instead of changing this and making this smaller, and now I can't see my HIS, I can clip them. And all that does is cut off the tops and the bottoms. See what I mean? And because we care about timing and not morphology, I can do that, and it's still legal. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I got a picture of that on Wednesday.
Ah.
The clipping.
Stim configurations, once you get everything set up, then you got to program your stimulator. You got to tell it block A, block B, where your high rate atrium catheter is. And because engineers are engineers, they always have positive first and negative second, but we count backwards because remember what I said for pacing? The lowest number always has to be negative. So in this case it goes 1, 2, in this case it goes 17, 18. Over here, CS, I have no idea why it's such a fancy little ignore ablation with 17, 18. Okay? Yeah. And then you would just decide where you put everything on here. Obviously, a 12-lead page. Final settings you can go through depending upon the system. Tell it what ablation device and what information it's going to record. When it's going to do certain things like save arrhythmias, high heart rates, lower heart rates. What channel is the atrial and HIS and ventricular, if it's going to automatically mark those locations for you and do timing measurements for you automatically.
When you set up the STEM part, do you pre-program in all routine
Yes.
S1, S2s?
Oh, no. I program what channel it's going to go on.
That's all.
That's
You don't
it.
have to put in
No,
all
because
that
that's-
other information.
No, because
That's
that
all
has
done.
nothing to do with your recording system. That actually
Oh,
is
that's
from,
your pacing.
that's from
Okay.
pacemaking system.
Gotcha, okay.
All right. When you're looking at pacing, you consider the recording system to kind of be like your traffic cop.
Mhm.
You say, channel 1, it's going to go pace in the atrium. Channel 2, it's got the ventricle. And then you can always say, you know what, I really don't care. I'm not pacing the ventricle. I'm turning that channel off. So no matter what happens over here, it can't get through. You see what I mean? And that's what you see up here. Ignore this blue one. These are the 4 pacing channels. And you see how they're gray right now? You know what that means? They're off. Not going to do anything. If they're red, you can pace through that channel. Why do we make it red instead of green? You remember how I told you that stimulator is dangerous? It's red. Warning, you can pace in the ventricle now. But only you. I'm not going to let anybody else know pace in the ventricle. All right. And some of the systems actually have built-in vital sign recording capabilities, so you'll be able to program all that type of information. When the alarms are going to go off for low O2 saturations, how often the blood pressure is going to do different things, that sort of stuff. Your final settings on our system, we pick what we call protocols, which basically declare what kind of, because you can see it, we have our log, and then it says the S1, S2, S3, S4, and then you can drop measurements in there. Well, you can program that individually to each one of these different protocols, and then you can select the protocol. So if you're only doing A pacing, you only want to see your you'll see an AH or whatever, or an H or an AV, and you're measuring it, you'll get that. Then in your V pacing, well, at that point it's going to be a VA, because it's going backwards. What's your VA intervals, that sort of stuff. Not bad. You guys got about 9 minutes and 15 seconds to throw food in.
Are you going to show your